The other centers that I've got listed here, I have a habit of like taking taking a person every few years. At least this is the trend that I've seen. So for example, for Dalhousie, they actually took two of us this year, and we have an R3 who was sponsored, and we have somebody who just finished that was sponsored. But it's more of like a year on, year off kind of thing, or at least that's the impression that I've gotten. Uh, the big thing that I'd say really is if you're really interested and this is the path that you've decided that you want to take, it really doesn't hurt to like shoot the division administrator an email or the program director an email and like ask, will you be opening a spot for people starting in 2026, for example, or people starting in 2027, etc. I'd say that's the best way to get an actual answer. Because, like, for example, for Western and Ottawa, as far as I know, there's like one Saudi in Western and one Saudi in Ottawa, and that's it, like over the course of like a 5-year program. University of Montreal recently started accepting Saudis. I don't know if you guys know this, but like University of Montreal and McGill are both in Montreal, obviously, but University of Montreal is like a French-speaking university, so the way that they work is they expect you to come first, you do a year of French. You have to meet like a certain level in French and like a French level assessment, and then you can start residency with them. So basically, it'll take a year longer to get it done than with anybody else just to get that French requirement out of the way. It can be a pretty nice year in my opinion. Like you're spending a year in Montreal, you're learning French, maybe a little bit more laid back than being a resident. So you can look at it that way as well, but that's the options that we have currently. Toronto have not taken any IMGs for a few years at this point, though I do think that within the next year or two they will go back to taking at least somebody every few years. As far as I know, I don't think any of the other centers in Canada are in the habit of taking IMGs. These these are the ones that I know have been accepting relatively recently. But like some of the other centers that I can think of, like Manitoba, I think they took somebody a while ago, but nobody within recent history. I don't think UBC ever took anybody. Most of the French universities, Alberta, Calgary, I don't think those took anybody either, to be honest. Of course, fellowships is a different situation. A lot of the centers that don't take like sponsored IMG residents do take fellows, for example, like UBC, etc. But I'm talking mainly about residency here.
Point clear.
Okay. Requirements for application. I don't know why I tried to go on the Mass website recently and it was closed for some reason, but I think this is like pretty well known slash standardized. Uh, you, There have been instances where they'll accept somebody who has not already passed slash taken the MCCQE exam. And what they'll say in these situations is take the exam and pass it, and then you can start. Like I know two people, three people actually, from like different centers and different specialties that were accepted without passing the MCCQE. But they were told you have to pass this before you can start your residency, and you need this exam to get your license, basically. So this is the big one, and English proficiency is actually not required by all centers. There were a few centers that requested it, not all of them. But I would say, like, especially in a situation in which you're like, especially if you want ENT or you're in a situation in which you want a competitive specialty like ENT, I'd much rather you have all of this done when you're applying because you don't want any possible holes in your application. They've got a lot of they've got much more applicants than they have spots currently in Canada, and that's how it's been for the past few years. You don't want them to be doubting you over something as dumb as the English proficiency exam or the MCCQE exam. I would much advise that you have those two ready by the time you're applying. Regarding English proficiency, they want above a 7 in all subcategories of the IELTS, like the reading, writing, speaking, and listening. I do find I'll talk a little bit more about the IELTS in the future, but the short story is some centers require it, some centers don't. But I'd say get it done because you don't want to limit your options just because of something as simple as an English proficiency exam. Like we've all gone through medical school and we've all had to tolerate English for that many years. I don't think this will be too hard. The MCCQE exam, I remember when I was applying and a little bit afterwards, there was this impression or misconception that they don't care about the score. It's just pass and come along. This might be true for some other specialties, but for ENT, it really isn't. I discovered that for my program, they actually do look at your MCCQE exam score just to see. Well, when I was talking to my program director, he told me two things really. One is it's kind of a test of English proficiency for them because if you got a good score on the MCCQE, it means that you understand English well enough to use it in like a professional slash medical environment. And two, it actually tells us that, oh, you're above a certain baseline of knowledge in medicine or understanding of medicine. And to be honest, it's not really a hard exam compared to some of the other exams that we have to take. CV, when I applied to Canada, I used pretty much the exact same CV that I used in Saudi Arabia. I maybe made like a few tiny adjustments here and there, but really nothing major. Only thing that I changed, I think, was like who my references were, or and that's because like in Saudi, I used to change who my references were based on who I'm sending the CV to. And same thing I did in Canada. Based on where the CV is going, I change my references to somebody they might know or recognize. Personal statement, I have not heard much being said about the personal statement, and nobody really brings it up. How much program directors or admissions panels like look at them, I really don't know, unfortunately. I mean, it's just a single page document in which you write like why you want ENT and a little bit about yourself. I don't think it's hard to write. The one thing that I would say about this is please do not use ChatGPT. Like it does become obvious sometimes, slip-ups happen, and for a lot of for a lot of these people that are used to reading personal statements and all of that, they can sort of pick up when something is being written by ChatGPT. It kind of looks that, there's a certain appearance slash flow to text that's written by ChatGPT, and it kind of looks clear. If you're just asking ChatGPT to make a few modifications here and there or like accentuate it in certain ways, that's fine. But if you just ask it to write something from scratch, you will be exposed, and it's really not a good look. Like one of those things that would really be detrimental for your application process is if people find out that you had your personal statement, for example, written by ChatGPT. It's just not a good look. I mean, obviously, if you want to apply, you need to complete medical school and complete internship. Research is helpful. Like they do prefer that you have a research background, have a few publications, like maybe presented somewhere or were in some kind of conference. And as mentioned earlier, this misconception or impression that's going around of oh they don't care about scores at all or they don't look at scores is nonsense. They do look at scores, and as a matter of fact, for McGill, I found out recently that one of their filtering processes was they look at your MCCQE score. I think the threshold was 250. Don't quote me on that, but the idea was pretty much if you score less than 250, like if you score less than 250, you won't even make it into the screening for a possible interview. When we were applying, I remember that the portal would like closed on June 30th, I believe. And the thing is, our internship also, I'm getting a message, just a second. Do they look at GPA? I do think so, yes. A lot of these centers, especially a center like McGill that has been taking Saudi graduates for a very long time, knows that a GPA is usually a reflection of how good a candidate is. So I do think they look at GPAs. It hasn't been discussed clearly, and I don't think it's as big of a factor maybe as it is here in Saudi, though I do think that they're looking at GPAs. Especially with ENT here in Canada, there's like as I mentioned earlier, a lot of applicants and not that many spots. So I do think they kind of have the luxury of filtering through a lot of what they like and what they don't like. As I was mentioning, when I was applying, the application portal was like shut down on June 30th, and my internship ended June 30th. So I wasn't supposed to get my internship completion certificate until after. And I actually didn't get my like medical school completion certificate until after June 30th either. But I just made that clear when I was applying that it wasn't really a big deal. Nothing really happens during July as far as the application process goes, apart from a few things. But so like if you have a few things that are kind of pending that will arrive in early July, like if you're applying during the end of internship, things will go fine. It's not really that big of a deal. MCCQE, as I mentioned earlier, they do look at the score. And I do think that greater than 250 is what McGill considered the cutoff. Uh, my understanding is certain centers or certain program directors have realized that the higher your MCCQE score is, usually you're a better resident. Not so much, but the big thing for them was that they noticed you're more likely to pass the Royal College exam or like your end of training exam. A lot of people, when I was studying for the exam or preparing for the exam, were studying from a question bank called Canada Q Bank. I don't know if it's still around or being used, but I found it to be terrible and a waste of time. I wouldn't recommend anybody use it. I kind of combined my studying for step 2 with studying for the MCCQE, and then I added on a few chapters from Toronto Notes, and that was enough for me to get like a pretty good score. The back when I did the exam, there was like a CDM portion or a clinical decision making portion, which was basically like a short answer question part of the exam, and thankfully that has been cancelled starting now. On the official website for the Medical Council of Canada, there's like a few officially endorsed sources for studying, like a question bank or like a small question bank, like some sample questions basically for you to get a feel of the exam. I found those were a very good reflection of the exam, and some of the questions there like showed up like almost verbatim on the original exam. I would like, unfortunately, it was quite expensive, but I would recommend studying from that a little bit before the exam just to get a feel of how they ask questions and how they structure things. Canada Q Bank, to be honest, I do not recommend. If you just study from UWorld for a few months, that should probably be enough. Sorry, I forgot to ask earlier. I don't know where you guys are in terms of training or how far in you guys are training. Like, are you guys final year medical students, interns, etc.? But my recommended time to take the exam would be end of internship. If you do plan on applying like directly at the end of internship. Usually at around like January, like more than halfway through your intern year, you're done with most of your exams and you kind of can slow down, and that's a good time to start preparing for the exam and taking it. If you can prepare for step 2 and MCCQE at the same time and do them both at the same time, that's usually a pretty good idea slash option. There are a few chapters from Toronto Notes that I do recommend studying before going into the exam, though unfortunately I have lost that screenshot for now. I will be sending it to Umar as soon as I get it, and then he can distribute it to you guys. Though there are like I don't think it's worthwhile to go through the entire book, but you can just go through a few subsections. Sorry, just a second, and I'll be back. Okay, sorry, I'm back. Wait, sorry. Before I move on, any questions about the MCCQE?
There is a Q&A session in the last,
Perfect.
so
Okay, IELTS exam, which is the other thing that I mean, not all centers recommend, but not all centers request it, but I would recommend you just get it done and get it out of the way. I mean, it's a test of English proficiency, and there's lots of people online talking about how to do the exam, etc. Big thing that I'd say is writing is the most common pitfall, or most people, if they don't hit the above 7 on all sections, it's going to be writing. So if you are going to take it soon, I just recommend focusing on writing. Big way to do that is just practicing, like getting an IELTS question stem, timing yourself, and making sure that you can write a decent paragraph within the time frame that they give you. One of my friends used to have ChatGPT. I don't know if it was ChatGPT or some other AI-driven product, sort of assess slash score how he's doing on his writing sections, and it was actually pretty accurate. So that's a good way to test if you're doing well or not on the writing section. The rest of the exam, most people I find don't struggle with too much. If your English proficiency isn't quite there, you're probably aware of that. and you might need a little bit more preparation. I mean, like, there are tips and tricks to do well in like the speaking exam, reading exam, all of that. But that's all stuff you can find online that I don't really think is within the scope of our presentation today. This was a slide that I stole from Dr. Shahir. Thank you very much to him, but I quite liked it. This is what the timeline looked for us. I don't think that it has changed at all, but when I tried to sign in recently, it said that the application portal was closed. I'll get to the questions in the end. Sorry, guys. Uh, I don't know if this has changed, but this is what it was looking like for us. In March, the application portal opens. And oh yeah, one thing that I didn't mention regarding requirements slash what you need is a sponsorship letter. And that is some institution saying that we are going to sponsor this person while he does his residency in Canada. Uh, especially if you're an intern or medical, like especially if you're an intern or like you're just starting residency, you probably can't get this letter from like your institution. If you're like a teaching assistant أو يعني معيد بالعربي, that's pretty easy to obtain from your institution. Otherwise, what you can do is just go to Safir 2 and say, I'm applying to Canada. I need a paper that states that I will be sponsored by the Ministry of Education in case I do get accepted. And they'll produce that PDF or document for you. Me and my friends applied with that and then started the search for sponsors. Uh, as mentioned, it usually closes on 30th of June for the start of next year. Like, for example, this application cycle, or like this, if you apply by 30th of June this year, you'll be starting July 1st, 2026. And that's usually the standard in which it works. The app, and that's going to be sent to everybody. Only thing is, the Cultural Bureau will by default send the documents when you upload them to MAS to all of the universities. There's no difference really in the requirements. Interviews offers usually from what I saw arrive like late September, and then between the 10th and 15th of October, they usually try to send them within roughly the same time. You'll be getting your offers from your accepting universities. They usually how it's supposed. I know this doesn't always happen exactly like this, but how it's supposed to go is you get all of your admissions slash acceptances at the same time, and then you're supposed to within 72 hours give them all word back of like, okay, yes, I want to join you, and to the others, no, I'm not interested. That's how it's supposed to go. Unfortunately, in the past, there have been delays here and there, but that's how it's supposed to work at least. Dalhousie for ENT for my year had a very different process slash timeline to this. How they operated was around September, they sent us emails saying, if you want to be accepted, we want you to come do a 2-week elective slash interview. So like they had like I think 5 applicants shortlisted for the spots. So all of us at different times went to there for 2 weeks, and then at the end of the 2 weeks did the interview and then came back. And then a few months later, we got our acceptance in February actually. But then the advantage for us with going through this 2-week elective slash interview process was that we didn't have to do the PEEP. If you know people that were accepted in Montreal or Toronto, for example, they have PEEP. And PEEP is basically you're expected to like come to Canada 3 months earlier, and during the months of April, May, June, you're going to be working in some capacity, basically as like a senior medical student, junior resident. And during this time, they just want to make sure that you're like a teachable, sane person. I only know one person that wasn't accepted after their PEEP, and that's because they had like serious attitude issues. Otherwise, like if you make it to PEEP, you're there. Just don't be an idiot, basically. Interview preparation. This is really like on a case by case scenario. Though from what I've noticed is what they really care about is like character and like having a good healthy character that they can work with for 5 years. You have to keep in mind that for most of these people, this is somebody that I'm going to have to work with, deal with, teach for 5 years. And usually, like the residency group, I mean, especially in Dalhousie, maybe more than others, like the residency group and the staff group are quite close. Like there's a lot of social events. They're quite friendly and chatty. They want somebody that they can live with for 5 years. So like somebody with like a healthy, nice social character is very important for them during this point. Other things that obviously matter to them a lot are like good communication skills, decent enough language proficiency. I mean, they don't want somebody that won't be able to. I mean, like the big problem would be if they aren't able to obtain like a proper history from a patient just because of like a language barrier. But then they also want somebody who can like clearly document what's going on. This is some of us do struggle with this in the beginning, though you do pick it up if you're above like a certain level. Uh, s- s- Teachable attitude. Maybe for people who are like senior medical students, interns, etc., this isn't a big issue. But a lot of the people that they accept were actually residents, like in their second, third, sometimes fourth year that went to Canada and then started over fresh. Some of these people kind of have an ego and they kind of lose this sort of teachable attitude. It's like, my way is fine. I don't know why people are telling me I shouldn't be doing this or I need to do that, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes quite irritating for the attending that they're working with. So making sure that you have like a healthy teachable attitude in which like you can take feedback, you can take criticism, say, okay, I'll change, whatever. It's really not hard, to be honest. It's just that as you get older and more experienced, you become less teachable, to be honest. Professionalism, obviously, uh, like I said, being organized, being on time, meeting deadlines, all of that is very important. They also kind of need to make sure that you have some kind of life outside of work. Residency can be very taxing from like a mental point of view. And if you don't have some kind of outlet or some other way to spend your time other than just studying and reading and working, it doesn't really bode well in the long term. And that's why I discovered that this is like something that they actively seek and look for. I mean, just like in Saudi Arabia, but this is something that they actively seek and look for on TV. It's like, what does this person do in his free time? And for a lot of us, we actually chatted quite a bit in our interviews about like what we did in our free time and what we enjoyed. Uh, Apart from that, at least for my interview, they already saw my CV and they didn't really care about the professional aspect. It was much more of a look at the kind of stuff that I listed on the left. Important factors for getting accepted. One really big factor, and I think is quite important for most centers, is knowing you personally. If they could be exposed to your character and what you're like to like work with and deal with and talk to, that will make a big difference for them. I found that especially when they're accepting somebody, they're not too hung up on you having too much knowledge. I mean, there are certain fundamentals within every specialties that you are expected to know. But for example, that's why our program does the 2 weeks before they accept you. And that's why a lot of other centers prefer that they know you in some way before they accept you, because 5 years really is a long time to spend with somebody. Strong references from known or recent graduates are useful. But what's even more useful than just a reference is if whoever like your mentor is or you're dealing with is like, especially if they're like a graduate of the program, if they can like get in touch with the program and say like, oh, I know so and so quite well and I like him and I think he'll be a good fit for your program, etc. That actually goes quite a long way. A personalized reference is useful, but this is even better, to be honest. Yeah, I've discovered that if it's just like a generic reference letter in which it's like they tell the secretary just write a letter for so and so, they don't really look at it or care about it. Obviously, a well-rounded CV, like as I was talking about, like the standardized examinations, your scores, some research work. I don't think they care too much about like the volunteering, as we like to call it, or like the social the social education campaigns that they do. I don't find that they're too important for them. But this is just my experience. Some other people might disagree. Okay, thank you very much. These are my contact details. I'll just leave a small disclaimer. I'm quite busy, and unfortunately, it'll very frequently happen that I read your message when I'm like the middle of work or I'm doing something, I forget to respond. If that happens, please just send me a gentle reminder and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. You'll probably have a better chance of getting back to me if you WhatsApp me on my phone number than Twitter. A lot of Twitter messages go to spam. And please feel free to ask me any sort of questions that you have.
طيب قبل ما ننتقل للكيو ان اي سيشن بس نبي نقدم جزيل الشكر للدكتور الجبار اليماني على قبوله لهذه الدعوة، وحاب أوصل برضو شكري لنادي الاي ان تي بجامعة جدة على مساعدتهم لي لإتمام هذا اللقاء، على رأسهم دكتورة تالا مساوة ودكتورة البتول الغامدي. وإن شاء الله رابط المحاضرة المسجلة حيتم مشاركتها على الأحد القادم إن شاء الله. والحين ننتقل فقرة الأسئلة. كيف حاب دكتور الأسئلة تكون؟ هل فويس ولا في تشات؟
I'll go through the questions في الشات. أول شيء يعطيك العافية، يعطيكم العافية جميعا. I'll go through whatever's going on in the chat. For actually, I think it's better if I just go through the chat, because otherwise I think some questions will get lost if they just ask them by voice. Yeah, I'd prefer if you have a question, just ask me in the chat. Well, afterwards you can raise your hand and we'll try to get to you. First question from Abdullah, GPA. I think I touched on this a little bit. Especially if the center has been taking Saudis for a long time and they know our schools and education system, they probably do look at the GPA, and they probably know that a certain GPA does reflect a certain level of medical student slash resident. And they do have this conviction, probably rightfully so, that if you were a good medical student, you'll probably hold a certain standard as a resident and continue that, basically. How long should it take for me to prepare for the exam, and did you take SMLE? This is a question by Ali. I'm assuming you're talking about the MCCQE. I had taken step 2 much earlier, to be honest. So I studied for this for like a few weeks, just reading like certain chapters from Toronto Notes that I will share with you guys, and seeing like the test or like the sample questions and answers from the MCC. But for most people around me that just studied for this, 2 or 3 months is probably good enough. If you just go through UWorld, I go through UWorld and then go through the chapters that I specified in Toronto Notes, and actually 3 to 4 months is probably a more realistic estimate. If you go through UWorld and go through the specified chapters in Toronto Notes and the sample question from the MCC, I think you have a solid chance at getting a high score. I did take the SMLE. I was done with SMLE in December, I think. By December I was done with SMLE, and then in January, I'm not sure what was happening in January, but I took the exam somewhere early, like late intern year. Is OET accepted instead of IELTS? Yes, I'm pretty sure yes. I'm not sure what the criteria are for OET, like what's the minimum threshold, and I have heard from some people that it's considered easier. I have taken both exams, to be honest. I didn't find one to be particularly easier than the other. It's just that I saw IELTS and I uploaded it, but OET is accepted, yes. Observerships and electives post-college chances. I don't understand that question. Sorry, Abdullah. How long did it take for me to prepare for the MCCQE? As I mentioned already, it took me, I would say, giving it 4 months. Like the last 5 or 6 months of your intern year are usually pretty chill, and I think that's a good time to prepare for it. And you can probably get step 2 done with it at the same time if you study how I recommend it. And how I would recommend it would be going through like the question bank for UWorld step 2, obviously, not step 1, specified notes and a few sample questions and answers. I did the SMLE question. I'll be honest, I was taking my SMLE exams in 2022. It's been a while. I wouldn't recommend taking advice from me on that end. I see that scores are much higher now than they were at my time. I do think exam taking strategies have changed, so I wouldn't recommend that. دكتور، كيف الابتعاث من الناحية المالية؟ هل صحيح ما يكون فيه راتب ريزيدنت مجرد مكافأة؟ The way it's structured is a little bit weird, but long story short is you're going to be getting $4,000 like every single sponsored applicant is going to be getting $4,000. And then, sorry, every single non-sponsored applicant will be getting $4,000 from like the Saudi Arabian Cultural Bureau here. And then if you are sponsored by a certain institution like وزارة الصحة تخصصي الحرس الجامعي whatever بيجيك راتب زيادة or like مبلغ زيادة. والمبلغ الزيادة هذا يتراوح حسب اللي شفته من 4000 إلى 7000 ريال تقريبا. آه، رسميا المبلغ اللي يجيك يعتبر مكافأة حسب علمي which is why you don't have to pay taxes on it which is pretty nice. يعطيك العافية دكتور على هذا الشرح الوافي. بخصوص الأبحاث هل يهتمون أن تكون في نفس المجال؟ Uh, I do. I think that it's better to have that, but from what I've seen so far, the big thing for them is that you have some kind of research experience. So even if it's not within exactly the same subspecialty that you're applying for, having a good breadth of research as an applicant is nice. How is Halifax as a city? I like it, to be honest. It's a smaller city than, for example, Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. There are a few pros and cons. I won't waste too much time talking about that. Pros are people there are very nice. It's a smaller city, and people like people there are very nice, be it patients or like staff and residents around you. There's not really much of the toxicity going around as you might see in a bigger center. And patients are like some of the easiest patients I've ever seen to deal with. They barely ever give any of us a hard time, which is fantastic. Problems like one, you don't have any big cities around you. Like if you look at a map and look at Toronto or Montreal or like something in Ontario or Quebec, you'll see that like a lot of the big cities are next to each other. We're kind of like isolated far east. We've got a lot of like nature around us, which is nice if you're that kind of person, but not a lot of other big cities around you. And the other thing that we have, and the other problem that we have is that flying. I mean, it's not as big of a city as the others. So flying from Halifax to Riyadh or Jeddah is not as easy as it would be if you're from like Toronto or Montreal. Like if you're from Jeddah and you're doing a residency in Toronto, that's a dream actually because you've got direct flights. Uh, is there a baseline for research papers? No. Do I recommend getting accepted as a resident in Saudi, then transferring to Canada once I get a sponsor by my center? I was a resident in Saudi and then I left, and I was sponsored by the center that I was a resident in. Uh, Honestly, I would highly recommend like a And a big part of that is you're not even guaranteed an acceptance in Canada. So you wouldn't want to like just apply to Canada and then find yourself without any sort of residency spot. And quite frankly, like a lot of the Saudi residency programs in ENT are really good. I can't really speak about the ones in Jeddah. I'm assuming most of the attendants are from Jeddah. I can't really speak to the ones in Jeddah, but a lot of the ones in Riyadh are quite good in my opinion. Uh, on average, how many IMG ENT residents are accepted per year, and how many residents were accepted this year? So, from what I've seen, it's usually about 2 to 3 people per year. In my year, Dalhousie took 2 people, and that was it. And for the year following mine, so people starting in July 2025, I think there was just the one applicant that was accepted in McGill. I don't think anybody else was accepted anywhere. That's as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I've seen, I'd say it's about 1 to 3 residents per year. The centers were the ones that I mentioned earlier, and I'd say actually no, with Montreal, maybe 1 to 4 residents per year, maybe. The written part was already removed from the exam for this year, yes. How will this change the score and like how the score is like presented and interpreted? I really don't know, to be honest. I'm sorry. Do different centers in Canada differ in terms of ENT departments and in exposure, different subspecialty focus? The centers that I know, which are Toronto, McGill, Dalhousie are all pretty heavy on head and neck. The other centers might be a little bit like in terms of the center being heavy on head and neck, I think that's pretty internationally standardized. How much they focus on the other subspecialties might vary. I can't really speak to that as much. I'd advise speaking to residents in those centers and seeing. Do they prefer residents rather than fresh graduates? I've heard conflicting opinions about this question, to be honest. Some centers, from what I've seen, prefer the fresher graduates. I mean, the thing is, naturally, as far as I know, you can only apply when you're almost done with your internship. So between like let's say you apply June 2025, you won't be starting until July 2026. The hope is you'll acquire some kind of experience in that year regardless. I do think that McGill prefers people with a little bit of experience. Yes. I'm not sure how the others operate though. About electives in the AFMC portal, international medical students seems to mean Canadians studying abroad. Is that just a temporary definition, or does it mean non-Canadians can't apply for electives through AFMC at all? I don't know, to be honest. The elective that I did was a little bit different because I was invited. Like after I applied, Dalhousie said, "Okay, we like you. We want you to come, or like we potentially like you. We want you to come spend 2 weeks, and we see how that works out." And they had like a bunch of people come and do 2 weeks. I do know a few people that did do electives in Canada. I'd ask them if I were you. If you don't know anybody that did an elective in Canada, talk to me and I'll try to get you in touch with somebody who has done an elective. But I can't answer your question, unfortunately. Do I get compensation from the program slash hospital you're at in Canada? Yes, the $4,000 comes from them, kind of. I mean, all of the money that you're getting is essentially coming from Saudi. It's just some of it is routed through the hospital, and some of it is kind of directly through Saudi. It's like you get 2,500, I think, directly through the Saudi Cultural Bureau, and then 1,500 from your hospital. But the 1,500 you get from your hospital is actually coming from the government. And then you get on top of that, like some amount if you're sponsored by your institution between 4,000 and 7,000 riyal. هل القبول يفرق بالنسبة لغير السعوديين عشان الملحقية؟ ما فهمت السؤال. I'm not sure non-Saudis can apply through the portal that I'm talking about. At least I don't think they'd be sponsored by the Saudi government. That's my interpretation slash understanding. I see that Mohab, I'm assuming, has his hand up. Please go ahead.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
يعطيك العافية دكتور، شكرا على وقتك.
الله يعافيك.
بس عندي شوية أسئلة تكرمت.
تفضل.
أول شيء موضوع السبونسر شيب، هل هو مانجبل از ان انترن إنه ناخذ السبونسر شيب من بدري بحيث إنه نخلص تقديم بنهاية الانترنشيب؟
So what يعني me and quite a few of my friends قدمنا نهاية الinternship and we all did the same thing. I wouldn't even advise that you start looking for a sponsor except in like certain situations. بس اللي سويناه كلنا we went دخلنا على موقع سفير 2 ومن سفير يعني تقدم على يعني طلب بعثة وتقول ان انا بقدم على برامج طب الإقامة في كندا وابغى ورقه تقول او يعني تنص على انه اذا انقبلت يعني انتم راح تتكفلوا فيني ماديا ويطلعوا لك الورقه مو مشكله يمديك تدخل على موقع سفير 2 اليوم وتبدا الاجراءات هذه. هو بس الشيء الوحيد اللي يقوله انك اذا جيت تدخل على سفير 2 انصحك تدخل من بوابه نفاذ. راح يجوك خيارين للساين ان، تسوي ساين ان من نفاذ، تسوي طلب ابتعاث وقول لهم احتاج الورقة هذه حقت التقديم، يطلعوا لك هي ما هي مشكلة. اللي احنا نسويه بصفة عامة انه بعد ما يجينا القبول برا نبدأ نروح على المستشفيات نقول لهم انا يعني مثلا حاليا ريزدنت في السعودية ولا حاليا سيرفيس في السعودية ولا غيرها وعندي قبول في المكان الفلاني وابغى اشوف اذا مستعدين يسبونسر مي. اكثر ناس اشوفهم قاعدين يسووا سبونسرشيب حاليا هم الحرس والتخصصي.
أنا
يعني
سمعت
هذول.
إن التعليم somehow وزارة التعليم sponsors it.
كلنا شوف، كلنا يعني كلنا على حساب وزارة التعليم، او $4000 هذه في النهاية تجيك من وزارة التعليم، يعني هذا مصدرها. بس وزارة التعليم ما هي جهة، يعني الشخص اللي من وزارة التعليم فقط في الغالب ما عنده جهة مبتعثة، من ناحية انه ما عنده جهة يرجع يشتغل لها اذا خلص. اذا انت مثلا سبونسرد من التخصصي ولا الحرس ولا غيرها، يعطوك مبلغ فوق $4000 هذه، يتفاوت المبلغ حسب الجهة المبتعثة. وبعدين اللي يصير انك لما تخلص من التدريب حقك متوقع منك انك ترجع وتقضي نفس عدد السنين اللي ابتعثوك. يعني مثلا انا اي ان تي ريزيدنت 5 سنين في كندا، وبعدين نقول سنه سنتين زياده فellowship 6 to 7 years. انا متوقع اني اذا رجعت الرياض ان شاء الله، يعني ارجع لهم 6 الى 7 سنين من 6 الى 7 سنين من العمل يعني.
وإذا ما كنت sponsored هل أقدر برضه أطلع؟ هيجيني ال $4000 بس اللهم إني
يس
حرجع من غير somewhat of
يس
a home يعني.
يس اكزاكتلي.
Yes.
هذا اللي يصير. بس يعني
Okay.
ما
Uh,
في احد مقبول في كندا وبدأ residency في كندا وما يجي ال $4000. This will go to everybody, absolutely everybody. اذا انت مقبول في residency program in Canada you will get this amount
yes.
يعني.
Okay. عفوا كمان سؤال ثاني. I've heard إنه observership is important يعني in regards إنه يعني you have to be seen by them or sort of يعني
Normally
يعرفوك ويشوفوك وكذا شيء زي كذا.
I do think it
فهل
is important, yes. And if
yes
you
هل منطقي
Sam
إنه مثلا بنهاية الانترنشيب الانترنشيب تخلص جون إنه واحد يطلع بعد جون
yes
قبل الانترفيوز حقت
منطقي
كندا.
جدا. لأنه ترى usually you'll find in you don't really get interviews until September. I don't know when they start screening CVs and all of that. But nothing really happens on the application front in July. For July and even August is a good time to go.
أيوة. هو الواحد وده يطلع في الانترنشيب بس we're kind of full في الانترنشيب.
Yeah. It's quite hard يعني اصلا الانترنشيب ما يسمحوا لك تروح برا بس كأبزرف، يعني they don't acknowledge that as clinical experience اصلا. بعدين انت رايح ركتب،
Yes.
هذا موضوع ثاني. But
Yes.
they would not want ان you go عشان موضوع
أيوة observers.
yeah.
معلش آخر سؤال كمان
تفضل.
بالنسبة للاختبار. طبعا we know إنه الديدلاين is June I think for the applications. ف
Yes.
اللي فهمته
انت
أنا
انترن حاليا؟
لا أنا سادس السنة الجاية.
اوكي.
فاللي فهمته إنه يعني آخر موعد منطقي إنك تختبر تقريبا مارش أبريل I think عشان تلحق تكون
شوف
يعني خلصت بحلول جون. هل هذا برضه
I
شيء
I
يعني
I
منطقي؟
don't know what the examination schedule is looking like now، ولكن اللي فهمته بعد ما شالوا السي دي ام صارت الدرجات تطلع بشكل أسرع بكثير. This is my interpretation. أنا اختبرت في April something، كان رمضان وقتها، وما طلعت درجتي إلا في جولاي. بس لما جيت قدمت حطيت إنه أنا مختبر واختبرت بالتاريخ الفلاني، بس انتظر النتيجة تطلع. قالوا ما هي مشكلة.
يس.
So yeah, this can happen, but I would recommend doing the exam like May, June, July is usually like April, May, June, like end of internship is usually a pretty good time to do this exam.
يس اوكي. واضح. الله شكرا مرة على وقتك. الله يجزاك خير.
حياك وياك. خلينا نشوف the other two questions. Uh, so how much? طيب, the total is $4,020. 4,000. It's $4,020 roughly. This is the amount that every single resident who's considered non-sponsored will get. And even the sponsored people, they get هذه ال $4,000. اللي يختلف عند ال sponsored people إنه on top of ال $4,000 هذه بيجيه مبلغ في حسابها السعودي من قبل الجهة الموظفة. يعني مثلا أنا موظف في تخصصي، شهريا ينزل لي راتب في حسابي في السعودية. مثلا أنت موظف في الحرس، شهريا حينزل لك يعني راتب حسابك في السعودية، يعني على ذلك المقياس. والمبلغ يتراوح من 4000 ل 7000 حسب الجهة المبتعثة. Generally speaking, if I couldn't secure a sponsorship, will the 4,000? Yes. Quite a few of my co-residents aren't. Halifax, for information, is a little bit more expensive than Montreal and some of the other cities. Toronto is the most expensive city. Toronto and Vancouver, I'd say, are the two most expensive cities. But I know people that are living on this 4,000 per month amount in all cities, where they do just fine. يعني having a sponsor means that you can save a little bit and maybe you can live a little bit more comfortably. But يعني you can, if your question is covering your living expenses, yes, it covers your living expenses everywhere. The difference that, like, for example, I faced was في السعودية ينزل لك مبلغ يعني من 18 إلى 20 ألف ريال تقريبا، وما عندك نص التكاليف اللي هنا لأنك ساكن مع أهلك، وإذا انقبلت ريزيدنسي فأنت في الغالب في نفس البيت، يعني حتى ما تدفع إيجار، فالتكاليف تخف عليك مرة في السعودية. يعني تقريبا ما كانت في تكاليف. في كندا you'll be spending a lot of money just bills, housing, food, etc. But if it's يعني if the question is covering living expenses, it covers living expenses. But quite a few of my co-residents here in Halifax don't have a sponsor. Okay.
في
I
دكتور، في سؤال هنا عن الخاص، تسأل تقول what about racism against hijab and niqab for Muslim females?
Regarding racism against niqab, I don't know, to be honest. I don't think we have any residents that wear a niqab in our center. Uh, that's as far as the niqab goes. I do imagine. I mean, the people in Halifax are very nice, but I do imagine there might be some racism. But the racism wouldn't come in the form of like direct racism. It would probably be stuff more subtle, like maybe not giving you as much opportunity to practice or work or hold you in as high of a regard. Uh, and unfortunately, I do think that this probably does happen in a lot of centers or countries if you go internationally. Though on the other hand, there are quite a few staff and attendings that are quite appreciative and considerate of the fact that you've traveled all this way and you're holding on to your traditions and values. I do know quite a few residents and fellows that we have across different specialties and surgical specialties actually that are female. Like we have a few female ortho residents and general surgery residents that wear hijab. And I don't, as far as I know, they haven't faced any problems with it. Though I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I don't know them well enough to give you a proper answer. As far as I know, actually we did have the ENT department here did accept like a female sponsored IMG, but it's been a while since then, and I don't know if she faced any issues.
Other questions from your perspective, you can rank what is most harder in Canada or in Saudi Arabia?
As a training program, to be honest, I have not done enough ENT in Saudi Arabia to really give you a measure of how hard it is. And I think there is naturally some variation depending on the center. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard this or seen this. Certain centers in Saudi Arabia do have a higher workload than others. I think this is natural. I'd say based on what I saw in Riyadh, workload here is similar to the heavier workload cities/centers that we have in Riyadh. But telling you flat out so and so is more difficult or has a higher workload than the other is difficult. I was in R1 in ENT before I came here in Saudi Arabia, but I don't know if you guys are aware, but most of R1 is actually off service. So I only did like a month of ENT, like on service, and then I traveled. I don't really know. Like I can't give you a proper answer.
كمان على القبول، يعني إيش الأسهل؟ يعني أتوقع هذا مع السؤال، إيش
هو
الأسهل؟
القبول، إذا القبول الصراحة أنا أشوف القبول في السعودية أسهل، لأنه أنا صراحة أشوف القبول في السعودية أسهل، يعني والسبب إنه عدد المقاعد في كندا قليل جدا صار. In Canada, you've got quite a few people that want to do their training in Canada, and you've got like like 1 to 4 spots a year, something like that. And keep in mind that you're not just competing with other Saudis, you've got Kuwaitis that are interested, possibly some Emiratis. I'm not sure I know of any Emiratis that are interested. So it's quite a large applicant pool and just a few spots. Though acceptance in Saudi has also become remarkably difficult over the past 2 years. Especially if you don't especially if you want to get accepted fresh out of internship without doing a year of service.
تمام دكتور، يعطيك العافية. بس في final thoughts، يعني final thoughts or tips you want.
Uh, a few things that I would say is لا تقفل على نفسك أبواب. And by that I mean I wouldn't recommend going around and telling everybody, oh, I want to go abroad, I want to go abroad. ENT specifically is a small community, and certain centers might not be interested in accepting you if they're aware that you want to do your residency abroad, which is very fair, honestly, first of all. So try to keep your options open. I would not recommend that anybody not apply for like the Saudi residency program. Uh, like the only situation in which I'd say that's okay is if you're like a teaching assistant at an institution and they're only okay with you going abroad. That's a different situation. Trying to make good connections with recent graduates is quite important / nice. So if you're, for example, interested in McGill or Dalhousie and you have a pretty solid relationship with an attending or staff who finished like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that's great. And I mean, for most people that I see getting accepted are pretty well-rounded candidates / applicants. I don't think there's one thing that tips them over the edge. I think having a pretty well-rounded good CV helps. And final thing is don't fixate too much on a certain center or idea or program. يعني ما تدري الخير وين سبحان الله. Those would be my final thoughts. There's a final chat. دكتور، هل أسهل الابتعاث إذا كنت قضيت residency في سنتر ولا أكون خريج؟ I really don't know the right answer to this one. Some centers I do believe prefer some people with some experience. My impression is that McGill prefers people with some experience. For Dalhousie and the other centers, I am not sure, to be honest. And you're very welcome. Happy to be here. Thank you for hosting me. I'll give you guys a minute or two in case there are any more questions, but I think we're done here. Thank you very much. And thank you, Umar, for hosting me, and thank you to the Student Club for this initiative.